A 70-year-old patient, Don Alberto Valdez, lay in a vegetative state in a hospital room, the steady beeping of machines his constant companion. Dr. Sofia Mendoza, a dedicated physician with warm brown eyes, made her rounds, checking his monitors and whispering greetings more out of habit than expectation. As she tended to him, she was interrupted by the head nurse, Marta, who informed her of an emergency in another room. In the hallway, she encountered Dr. Ramirez, a colleague known for his arrogance. He scoffed at Sofia's dedication to Don Alberto, calling him a lost cause and urging her to focus on patients with a real chance of recovery. Sofia, however, stood firm, declaring that every patient deserved their best effort. After stabilizing the emergency patient, she returned to Don Alberto's room, where his son Carlos anxiously awaited her. He informed her of developments in Don Alberto's legal situation and requested a private conversation. Sofia, sensing something was amiss, agreed. In her office, Carlos beat around the bush, mentioning the mounting medical costs and the strain of seeing his father in such a state. He suggested considering permanent alternatives, causing Sofia to bristle. She reminded him that euthanasia was illegal and that Don Alberto couldn't consent even if it were an option. Carlos backpedaled, claiming he only meant transferring Don Alberto to palliative care for comfort. Sofia remained skeptical, her instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Suddenly, Carlos's sister, Elena, burst into the room, frantic and distressed. She mentioned a problem with the lawyer, further piquing Sofia's suspicions. Carlos tried to downplay the situation, insisting it was unrelated to their father's care, but Sofia was not convinced. She insisted on a detailed conversation about Don Alberto's situation with both siblings and the entire medical team. Reluctantly, the Valdez siblings agreed, leaving Sofia with a heavy sense of foreboding. Returning to Don Alberto's room, she found Marta, the head nurse, looking worried. Don Alberto's vital signs were fluctuating strangely. Marta also mentioned that Elena had visited earlier, wanting time alone with her father, and leaving looking flustered. The pieces clicked together in Sofia's mind. Carlos's evasiveness, Elena's distress, the lawyer, and now these inexplicable changes in Don Alberto's vitals. Something was very wrong, and she suspected the Valdez children were hiding something potentially sinister. Sofia instructed Marta to meticulously review Don Alberto's visitor and medication logs for anything out of the ordinary, emphasizing that no one was to be alone with him without medical supervision. Left alone with Don Alberto, Sofia took his hand, vowing to uncover the truth and protect him. As if in response, his fingers twitched slightly, barely perceptible, but enough to send a jolt of hope through Sofia. "Don Alberto," she whispered, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" There was no answer, but Sofia was certain of what she felt. Quickly, she began a series of neurological tests, praying for a miracle. Sofia, working with the quiet efficiency that years of experience brought, ran through basic neurological tests, looking for any sign of consciousness or response from Don Alberto. Her mind raced. If he was showing even minimal signs of improvement, why were his children so eager to move him? What was this business with the lawyer that Elena had mentioned? And, most unsettling of all, was someone actively trying to harm Don Alberto? Sofia knew she was entering dangerous territory. If her suspicions were correct, she wasn't just dealing with a complicated medical case, but possibly a crime in progress. She needed to be cautious, to gather more information before making any accusations. As Sofia wrote down everything she knew, the door opened softly. It was Dr. Javier Soto, a respected neurologist and a close friend of Sofia's. "Sofia, what are you doing here so late?" he asked, surprised to find her there. Sofia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Javier, I'm glad you're here. I need your opinion on something." Javier, intrigued, stepped closer. "Sure. What is it? Is it about Don Alberto?" Sofia lowered her voice. "A while ago, I could have sworn I felt a movement in his hand. It was subtle, but I'm sure it happened." Javier's eyebrows shot up. "Really? That would be extraordinary given his condition." "I know," Sofia agreed. "And there's more. His vital signs have been fluctuating unusually." She showed Javier the records. The neurologist studied the data, his frown deepening. "This is odd. It's not what we'd expect to see in a patient in a persistent vegetative state." Exactly, Sophia said. And there's something else that worries me. She hesitated before continuing. Don Alberto's children have been acting strangely, talking about moving him, mentioning lawyers. I have a bad feeling about all this. Javier looked at her with concern. Sophia, are you suggesting that— I don't know, Sophia interrupted. I don't want to make accusations without proof, but something's not right here. I need your help to get to the bottom of this. You can count on me, Javier assured her. What do you need me to do? First, I want you to examine Don Alberto. I need a second opinion on his current neurological state. And then, if you can, I'd like you to discreetly investigate any recent changes in his treatment or medication. Understood, Javier said, getting to work immediately. As Javier examined Don Alberto, Sophia continued with her notes, trying to make sense of everything. Suddenly, she remembered something. Javier, she said, remember the case of Mr. Morales last year? The family that tried to speed up their inheritance? Javier looked up, confused by the change of topic. Yes, I remember. It was a scandal in the hospital. Why do you mention it? Sophia bit her lip, hesitating. It's just, there are some unsettling similarities. The rush to move the patient, the conversations about lawyers. Sophia, Javier cautioned, those are serious accusations. We need to be absolutely sure before suggesting anything like that. I know, Sophia replied, running a hand through her hair in frustration. It's just, I can't shake this feeling that something is very wrong here. At that moment, the machine monitoring Don Alberto's vital signs emitted a sharp beep. His blood pressure is dropping, Javier exclaimed. Sophia acted instinctively, rushing to the emergency cart. We need to stabilize him. Javier, prepare a dose of norepinephrine. As they worked frantically to stabilize Don Alberto, the door burst open. Elena Valdez stood there, her eyes wide with panic. What's happening? She cried. What are you doing to my father? Sophia, still focused on her patient, replied firmly, Senora Valdez, please, I need you to leave the room. We are handling a medical emergency. No, Elena exclaimed, moving closer to the bed. He's my father. I have the right to be here. Javier stepped between Elena and the bed. Madam, I understand your concern, but you need to let us do our job. We'll do everything we can to help your father. Elena hesitated, her eyes darting between the doctors and her father. Finally, with a choked sob, she left the room. After several tense minutes, they managed to stabilize Don Alberto. Sophia allowed herself a sigh of relief, but her mind was already working on the implications. Javier, she said quietly, I need you to check Don Alberto's medication. All doses, all recent changes. Something caused this crisis, and I don't think it was natural. Javier's expression was serious. I'll do it right away. But Sophia, if you find something— I know, she interrupted. If we find evidence of negligence, or God forbid, something worse, we'll have to inform the authorities. As Javier went to review the medical records, Sophia stayed by Don Alberto's bedside, her mind a whirlwind of worry and theories. She knew she was about to step into dangerous territory, one that could jeopardize her career and perhaps even her personal safety. But looking at the pale, inert face of her patient, she knew she had no other choice. I promise you, Don Alberto, she whispered, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. Outside the room, she heard raised voices. She recognized Elena Valdez in another voice that sounded like Carlos, arguing heatedly. She couldn't make out the exact words, but the urgency in their tones was unmistakable. Determined to learn more, Sophia moved closer to the door, trying to eavesdrop. We can't go on like this, Carlos, she heard Elena say, her voice trembling. This is getting out of hand. Calm down, Carlos hissed back. Everything will go according to plan if you just keep your composure. Do you want to lose everything? But we almost killed him, Elena cried, before Carlos abruptly cut her off. Sophia's heart raced, her worst suspicions seemingly confirmed. She was about to throw open the door and confront them when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned, startled, to find herself face to face with Marta. Doctor, Marta said quietly, I found something I think you need to see. Sophia cast one last glance at the door, where the voices of the Valdez siblings had subsided into inaudible whispers, then followed Marta. In a small, empty conference room, Marta spread several documents on the table. I was reviewing the records as you asked, Marta began, and I noticed something strange. There have been changes to Don Alberto's medication that were not authorized by you or any other doctor on the treatment team. Sophia examined the documents, feeling a mix of horror and confirmation. This is... Marta, do you realize what this means? Marta nodded grimly. Someone has been manipulating Don Alberto's treatment. And from what I can see, these changes could explain the fluctuations in his vital signs and the crisis he just suffered. Sophia ran a hand over her face, trying to process the information. We need concrete proof. Marta, can you secure samples of Don Alberto's current medication? We need to have them analyzed to see if they match what he's supposed to be receiving. Of course, doctor. I'll take care of it immediately. Just as Marta was about to leave, Javier entered the room, a look of urgency on his face. Sophia, you need to see this. He held out a tablet. I was reviewing the security footage from Don Alberto's room, and I found something disturbing. Sophia and Marta crowded around to look at the screen. The video clearly showed Elena Valdez entering her father's room late at night, glancing nervously around before taking something out of her purse and injecting it into Don Alberto's IV drip. My God, Sophia whispered, feeling the ground shift beneath her. This is clear evidence of tampering, Javier said, his voice tense. We need to inform the authorities immediately. Sophia's mind raced. Yes, but we need to be careful. If the Valdezes suspect we're onto them, they might try something desperate. What do you suggest we do? Marta asked, her voice shaky. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to calm herself and think clearly. First, we need to ensure Don Alberto's safety. Marta, I want you to arrange a discreet transfer to the intensive care unit. Invent a medical reason if you have to, but don't let the Valdezes know the real reason. Marta nodded and hurried out of the room. Javier, Sophia continued, I need you to contact hospital security. I want guards outside Don Alberto's room 24/7. And please, make sure all of this evidence is backed up and secure. Understood, Javier replied. What will you do? Sophia squared her shoulders, determination hardening in her eyes. I'm going to confront the Valdezes. We need to keep them occupied while we secure Don Alberto and contact the authorities. Sophia, that could be dangerous, Javier warned, concern etched on his face. I know, she replied, offering a tight smile, but someone has to do it. Don Alberto trusts us, Javier. We can't let him down. Sophia left the room, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering. As she walked down the hallway in search of the Valdez siblings, she couldn't help thinking how a normal night's work had turned into something out of a mystery novel. She found Carlos and Elena in the waiting area, speaking in hushed tones, their expressions tense. As they saw her approaching, they straightened, attempting to compose their faces into masks of filial concern. Dr. Mendoza, Carlos began, how is our father? We were told there was an emergency. Sophia stared at them, searching their faces for any sign of guilt. Don Alberto is stable for now, she said. But, Sophia continued, her voice carefully neutral, we've noticed some irregularities in his condition that concern us. We've detected unusual fluctuations in his vital signs, and he just suffered a crisis that cannot be explained by his current state. Elena paled. Irregularities? What do you mean? Carlos cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. But that can happen. I mean, his condition is delicate. Certainly, Sophia agreed, but these irregularities coincide with some recent changes in his medication. Changes that were not authorized by the medical team. The siblings exchanged a quick glance, one that did not escape Sophia's notice. What are you insinuating, doctor? Carlos asked, his tone turning defensive. Sophia, knowing she was treading a fine line, maintained her composure. I'm not insinuating anything, Mr. Valdez. I'm simply sharing information about your father's condition and seeking your cooperation to understand what is happening. Elena, visibly agitated, jumped in. But we don't know anything about his medication. How could we? Elena! Carlos cut her off sharply, then turned back to Sophia with a forced smile. Doctor, we appreciate your concern for our father. Of course, you have our full support in investigating any irregularities in his treatment. Sophia studied them, noting the tension between the siblings. I'm glad to hear that. In fact, I'd like to discuss some details further with you. Shall we move to my office? As she led them towards her office, Sophia sent a quick text to Javier. Got them with me. Proceed with the plan. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but she was determined to keep the Valdeses occupied long enough for Javier and Marta to secure Don Alberto and contact the authorities. What Sofia didn't know was that this confrontation was about to trigger a chain of events that would test not only her professional ethics, but also her personal safety. The night was far from over, and the real drama was just beginning. Sofia closed the door to her office, the soft click echoing in the tense silence. Carlos and Elena Valdez sat stiffly across from her desk, their eyes restless. "All right," Sofia began, sitting down and interlacing her fingers on her desk. "As I mentioned, we've noticed some irregularities in your father's treatment that deeply concern us." Carlos cleared his throat. "Dr. Mendoza, with all due respect, shouldn't we be discussing this with the entire medical team?" Sofia held his gaze. "Dr. Soto is attending to some matters related to this case right now. I assure you he's fully informed." Elena shifted uncomfortably. "But what does this have to do with us? I don't understand why you're questioning us." "It's not an interrogation, Senora Valdez," Sofia replied calmly. "I'm simply seeking information that can help us understand what's happening with Don Alberto." Carlos, his voice laced with impatience, interjected. "And what exactly is happening, doctor? Because so far you've only spoken of irregularities and concerns, but haven't said anything concrete." Sofia regarded them for a moment before replying. "Very well, I'll be direct. We've detected unauthorized changes in your father's medication, changes that could explain the fluctuations in his vital signs and the recent crisis." The color drained from Elena's face. What? What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Senora Valdez," Sofia said, her tone unwavering. "I'm stating a fact. What I need to know is if you have any information about who might have made these changes and why." Carlos leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "Careful, doctor. You're treading on very thin ice with these insinuations." Sofia didn't flinch. "They're not insinuations, Mr. Valdez. They are facts, backed by medical evidence. And I assure you, my only concern is the well-being of your father." Elena, visibly agitated, jumped to her feet. "This is insane. Carlos, let's go." Carlos, his voice shaking with barely contained rage, also stood. "Dr. Mendoza, you have no idea who you're dealing with. Our family has influence you can't even imagine." Sofia remained calm. "Your influence is of no concern to me, Mr. Valdez. My only concern is the health and safety of my patient." Suddenly the door burst open. It was Marta, her face pale. "Dr. Mendoza, you need to come quickly. It's Don Alberto." Sofia was on her feet in an instant. "What is it?" He's awake," Marta gasped. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Sofia looked at the Valdez siblings, their faces a mixture of shock and terror. "That's impossible," Carlos mumbled. Sofia didn't waste any time. "Marta, stay here with the Valdeses. Don't let them leave this office. I'm going to see Don Alberto." As Sofia rushed towards the ICU, her mind raced. How was it possible that Don Alberto had woken up? What did this mean for the ongoing investigation? She arrived at Don Alberto's room to find Javier and a team of nurses gathered around the bed. "What's going on?" Sofia asked, approaching the bed. Javier looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and confusion. "I don't know, Sofia. A few minutes ago, his vitals started fluctuating erratically, and then he opened his eyes." Sofia leaned over Don Alberto. His eyes were open, blinking slowly, but he didn't seem fully aware. "Don Alberto," she called softly, "can you hear me?" To her surprise, the man's eyes focused on her. His lips moved, trying to form words. "Easy," Sofia said, taking his hand. "Don't strain yourself. You're safe." Don Alberto weakly squeezed her hand and managed to whisper, "My children." Sofia exchanged a look with Javier. "Don Alberto, your children are here at the hospital, but before you see them, I need you to tell me something. Do you remember anything about what happened to you?" Don Alberto's eyes filled with tears. With visible effort, he managed to articulate, It wasn't an accident." At that moment, there was a commotion outside the room. Sofia stepped out to find two police officers struggling with Carlos and Elena Valdez. "I demand to see my father," Carlos yelled. Sofia stepped between them and the door. "I'm sorry, but at this time, Don Alberto is not in any condition to receive visitors." Elena, her eyes red from crying, pleaded, "Please, doctor, we just want to make sure he's all right." One of the officers stepped forward. Dr. Mendoza, could you explain what is going on here? Sophia took a deep breath. Officers, we have reason to believe that these individuals have been interfering with the medical treatment of Don Alberto Valdez, possibly with the intention of causing him harm. That's ridiculous, Carlos shouted. We're his children. The other officer, a stern-looking woman, spoke up. Mr. Valdez, I suggest you calm down. Dr. Mendoza, do you have any evidence to back up these accusations? The policewoman asked. Yes, Sophia nodded. We have medical records and security footage showing unauthorized tampering with the patient's medication. The policewoman nodded. Very well, Mr. and Mrs. Valdez. You'll have to come with us to answer some questions. As the officers led the Valdez siblings away, Sophia returned to Don Alberto's room. The old man seemed to be struggling to stay conscious. Don Alberto, Sophia said gently, I know you're tired, but I need you to tell me what happened. What did you mean when you said it wasn't an accident? Don Alberto closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, there was a clarity that surprised Sophia. My children, he began, his voice raspy. They wanted my fortune. The accident, they planned it. Javier, who had been monitoring the machines, stepped closer. Don Alberto, are you saying your children tried to kill you? The old man nodded weakly. I overheard their plans. They were going to poison me. But something went wrong. Sophia's blood ran cold. That's why you were in a coma? The poison? Yes, Don Alberto whispered. But it didn't work the way they expected. Instead of killing me, it left me like this. Javier cursed under his breath. That explains why his condition was so unusual. It wasn't a typical coma caused by an accident. Sophia gently squeezed Don Alberto's hand. I'm so sorry. It must have been terrible. Don Alberto looked at her with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. You saved me. Thank you. Don Alberto, Sophia said carefully, the police are here. Do you feel strong enough to give a statement? The old man nodded slowly. Yes, it's time for the truth to come out. As Javier went to get the officers, Sophia stayed with Don Alberto, her mind reeling. Don Alberto, she asked softly, how did you manage to wake up now, after all this time? The old man gave a faint smile. I was always aware, trapped in my own body. But when they changed my medication, something unlocked. Sophia shuddered. The thought of being conscious but unable to communicate for so long was terrifying. At that moment, the officers entered the room, followed by Javier. Don Alberto Valdez, one of the officers began, we understand you have information regarding an attempted murder against you. Do you feel capable of giving a statement? Don Alberto nodded. Yes, it's time my children face the consequences. As Don Alberto began to tell his story, Sophia couldn't help feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief at having uncovered the truth and being able to help her patient, but sadness at the pain and betrayal Don Alberto had suffered at the hands of his own children. The night had been long and full of unexpected twists, but finally it seemed the truth would prevail. However, Sophia knew this was just the beginning. There would be investigations, trials, and undoubtedly more shocking revelations. As she listened to Don Alberto's testimony, Sophia reflected on the events that led to this moment. Her instincts, her dedication to her patient, and her refusal to ignore the warning signs had been crucial in unraveling this mystery. Hours later, as she finally left the hospital, exhausted but satisfied, Sophia paused to look up at the dawn sky. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. She took a deep breath of fresh morning air, helping to clear her head. She had barely taken a few steps towards the parking lot when she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Sophia! Wait! She turned to see Javier hurrying towards her, his white coat flapping behind him. Javier, what is it? She asked, worry evident in her voice. Something happened with Don Alberto? Javier shook his head, trying to catch his breath. No. Don Alberto is stable. It's just that, well, I just spoke with the chief of staff. They want to see you now. Sophia's stomach clenched. Why? What's going on? Javier ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. Apparently, the Valdez family has some powerful connections. They've filed a formal complaint against you, alleging harassment and slander. Sophia felt her blood run cold. But that's ridiculous. We have evidence. Don Alberto's testimony. I know, Javier interrupted, placing a hand on her shoulder. But you know how these things are. Hospital politics, public relations. They want to talk to you before this gets out of control. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to calm herself. When she opened them, there was determination in her gaze. Fine, let's go. As they walked back towards the hospital, Sophia couldn't help but feel a mixture of frustration and bewilderment. I don't understand, Javier. How can they even consider these accusations after everything that's happened? Javier sighed. Money and power do strange things, Sophia. The Valdices are moving heaven and earth to discredit your testimony and Don Alberto's. When they reached the chief of staff's office, Sophia paused, squared her shoulders, and knocked. Come in, a voice called from inside. Sophia entered, Javier close behind. In the office were Dr. Ramirez, the chief of staff, and two men in suits whom Sophia didn't recognize. Dr. Mendoza, Ramirez said, his tone unusually formal. Please have a seat. Sophia sat down, maintaining her composure despite the palpable tension in the room. Dr. Mendoza, began one of the men in suits. I am the attorney representing the Valdez family. We understand you have made some very serious accusations against our clients. Sophia looked him straight in the eye. They're not accusations, sir. They're facts, backed by medical evidence and the testimony of Don Alberto himself. The lawyer smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. Ah, yes, the testimony of a man who has just come out of a supposed coma. Don't you find that convenient, doctor? Sophia felt anger rising within her. Are you insinuating I made all of this up? What my colleague is trying to say, interjected the other man, is that the situation is complicated. Don Alberto has been in a vulnerable state for a long time. It's possible he's confused, that his memories are unreliable. Javier, who had been listening in silence, couldn't contain himself any longer. This is ridiculous. We have clear evidence of tampering with Don Alberto's medication. The security camera footage, the first lawyer interrupted, can be interpreted in many ways. Mrs. Elena Valdez was simply adjusting her father's IV drip under doctor's orders. Surely, Sophia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Dr. Ramirez, she said, turning to the chief of staff, you're not actually considering these lies? Ramirez shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Dr. Mendoza, I understand your position, but we must consider all perspectives. The Valdez family is very well respected and has been a significant benefactor of this hospital for years. And that makes them untouchable? Sophia asked, her voice shaking with indignation. What about our Hippocratic oath? Our duty to protect our patients? No one is suggesting we ignore our duty, Ramirez said, though his tone lacked conviction. But we must proceed cautiously. A false accusation could have devastating consequences for the hospital. Sophia couldn't believe what she was hearing. She stood up, unable to contain her frustration. Devastating consequences? What about the consequences for Don Alberto? For the integrity of our profession? The first lawyer spoke again, his voice soft but with a menacing undertone. Dr. Mendoza, I suggest you carefully consider your next actions. A discreet retraction of your accusations might be the best solution for everyone involved. Sophia stared at him incredulously. Are you suggesting I lie? That I ignore an attempted murder? No one is suggesting you lie, said the second lawyer, his tone conciliatory. Just that perhaps you reconsider your interpretation of events? Javier, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, finally spoke. This is insane, Sophia. You don't have to listen to this. We have the truth on our side. Ramirez cleared his throat. Dr. Soto, I would appreciate it if you didn't complicate matters further. This is a delicate situation. Sophia looked at each person present, determination shining in her eyes. I will not retract my statement. I will not ignore what I saw, what we uncovered. If the hospital isn't willing to stand behind the truth, then perhaps I need to reconsider my position here. A tense silence fell over the room. Ramirez seemed about to say something when the door burst open. Marta rushed in, breathless. Dr. Mendoza! Dr. Ramirez! You have to come quickly. It's Don Alberto. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. What about Don Alberto? He wants to make a public statement, Marta gasped. He says he can't take the lies anymore. He's called the press. The lawyers exchanged panicked looks. Ramirez went white. The press? He repeated incredulously. But Sophia didn't wait to hear more. Without a word, she rushed out of the office, Javier close behind. As they raced through the hospital corridors, Sophia couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and hope. Would this be the moment the truth finally came out? They arrived at Don Alberto's room to find a chaotic scene. Reporters and cameras crowded the hallway as security guards struggled to maintain order. Dr. Mendoza, a familiar voice called. Sophia turned to see Elena Valdez, her face a mask of panic and desperation. Please, Elena begged, clutching Sophia's arm. You have to stop this. You don't know what you're doing, Elena cried. Sophia gently but firmly disentangled herself. I'm sorry, Senora Valdez, but I believe Don Alberto knows exactly what he's doing. With determination, Sophia pushed through the throng of reporters and entered Don Alberto's room. The old man was sitting up in bed, pale but with a look of resolve in his eyes. Dr. Mendoza, Don Alberto said, his voice weak but clear. I'm glad you're here. It's time the world knew the truth. Sophia approached the bed, aware of the cameras and microphones crowding the doorway. Don Alberto, are you sure you want to do this? You don't have to. Don Alberto cut her off with a wave of his hand. I have to do this, doctor. For you, for me, and for everyone who has been a victim of greed and betrayal. With a nod, Sophia stepped aside, allowing the reporters to enter the room. What followed was a confession that left everyone breathless. Don Alberto, in a shaky but firm voice, described how his own children had conspired to poison him, how he had been conscious but trapped in his own body for months, and how Dr. Mendoza had been the only one to suspect the truth and fight to uncover it. As the story unfolded, Sophia watched the reactions of those present. She saw disbelief give way to horror, sympathy, and finally outrage. She saw the Valdez's lawyers back slowly toward the door, their faces pale and sweaty. And she saw Ramirez standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and shame. When Don Alberto finished his account, a stunned silence filled the room. It was Javier who finally broke the silence. I believe, he said loudly, that some people have a lot of explaining to do. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Don Alberto's story and Dr. Mendoza's bravery became national news. Carlos and Elena Valdez were arrested and faced multiple charges. The hospital, in an attempt to salvage its reputation, issued a public statement fully supporting Sophia and promising an internal investigation into how the case had been handled. A week after Don Alberto's dramatic announcement, Sophia was back in his room performing a routine checkup. How are you feeling today, Don Alberto? She asked, checking his vitals. The old man smiled, a spark of vitality in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Better than ever, doctor. Free at last. Sophia returned his smile. I'm so glad. It's been a difficult journey, but finally the truth has come out. Don Alberto took Sophia's hand in his. Thank you, Dr. Mendoza. You not only saved my life, you gave me back my dignity. I can never thank you enough. Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. You don't have to thank me, Don Alberto. I only did what any doctor should do, fight for their patients. Not any doctor, Don Alberto said firmly. You are a special doctor. And I want you to know that I have decided to donate a considerable sum to this hospital on the condition that it be used to support young, ethical doctors like you. Sophia blinked in surprise. Don Alberto, that's incredibly generous. The old man smiled. It's the least I can do. I want to make sure there are more doctors like you in the future. Doctors who aren't afraid to stand up to the system when necessary. As Sophia left the room, she felt a mix of emotions. Relief, gratitude, and a renewed faith in her profession. The road had been difficult, but in the end, integrity and truth had prevailed. Javier was waiting for her in the hallway. Everything okay? He asked. Sophia felt a genuine smile light up her face for the first time in days. Yes, everything's okay. In fact, I think things are going to be a lot better from now on. As they walked down the hallway together, Sophia reflected on the events of the past few weeks. She had faced challenges she never imagined, had fought against a system that seemed to be against her, and had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. "You know, Javier," she said, pausing for a moment, "when I chose this profession, I knew it would be difficult, but I never imagined I'd have to fight not only against diseases, but also against corruption and greed." Javier nodded sympathetically. "I know, but you did it, Sophia, and you've inspired many in the process." Sophia looked around at the bustle of the hospital, at the nurses and doctors rushing to and fro, at the patients and their families. "This is just the beginning, isn't it? There's so much more work to be done." "That's right," Javier confirmed. "But now, thanks to you and Don Alberto, we have a real chance to make a difference, to make this hospital, and maybe the whole medical profession, a little bit better." The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the hallways. Sophia walked with a determined stride, her white coat billowing softly behind her. It had been 3 weeks since Don Alberto's dramatic confession, and the hospital was still buzzing with the repercussions. As she rounded a corner, Sophia almost collided with Marta, who was carrying a stack of files. "Dr. Mendoza!" Marta exclaimed, regaining her balance. "Just the person I was looking for." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What's up, Marta? You seem agitated." Marta glanced around before lowering her voice. "It's about the board meeting. I've heard rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Sophia asked, her curiosity piqued. "Apparently they're considering some big changes to hospital policy, and your name has come up several times." Sophia frowned. "My name? In what context?" Marta shrugged. "I'm not sure, but I think it has something to do with the new medical ethics program Don Alberto wants to implement." Before Sophia could respond, a familiar voice boomed from down the hallway. "Dr. Mendoza, a moment, please." Sophia turned to see Dr. Ramirez approaching rapidly, his usually arrogant face now wearing an expression of concern that Sophia had never seen before. "Dr. Ramirez," Sophia greeted cautiously, "what can I do for you?" Ramirez glanced nervously at Marta before turning back to Sophia. "Could we speak privately?" Sophia, intrigued, nodded. "Of course. Marta, thanks for the information. We'll talk later." As she followed Ramirez to a small empty conference room, Sophia couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The last few weeks had been tense between them, with Ramirez clearly uncomfortable about how he'd initially handled the Valdez case. Once inside, Ramirez closed the door and turned to Sophia, his expression a mixture of regret and nervousness. "Dr. Mendoza," he began, "first of all, I want to apologize for my behavior during the Valdez case. I didn't handle the situation correctly and, well, I owe you an apology." Sophia blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "I appreciate that, Dr. Ramirez, but I have a feeling you haven't brought me here just to apologize." Ramirez nodded, running a hand through his graying hair. "You're right. The truth is, I need your help." "My help?" Sophia repeated, genuinely surprised. Ramirez took a deep breath before continuing. "As you know, the Valdez case has put the hospital under intense scrutiny. The board is worried about the hospital's reputation and is considering implementing drastic changes." Sophia crossed her arms. "What kind of changes?" "They want to create a new medical ethics committee," Ramirez explained. "A committee with real power to oversee complex cases and make difficult decisions." "That sounds surprisingly progressive," Sophia commented, still skeptical. "Where do I fit into all of this?" Ramirez looked her straight in the eye. "They want you to lead it." Sophia felt her breath catch. "What? But why me?" "Come on, Dr. Mendoza," Ramirez said, a wry smile twisting his lips. "After how you handled the Valdez case, you've become the face of medical integrity in this hospital. The board believes your leadership would lend credibility to the committee." Sophia sat down slowly, processing the information. I don't know what to say, Dr. Ramirez. It's an honor, but why are you telling me this? You, and not the hospital director?" She trailed off, and Ramirez finished the thought for her. Sophia nodded. Ramirez sighed deeply. "Because there's a complication. The board wants me to be a part of the committee as well." Sophia visibly tensed. "You? But after how you handled the Valdez case." I know, Ramirez interrupted, holding up his hands in surrender. They believe my experience could be valuable. And frankly, I think they're right. Sophia stared at him incredulously. How can you say that? You were willing to cover up an attempted murder to protect the hospital's donors. Ramirez slumped in a chair, his face a mask of regret. And that's exactly the kind of thinking we need to fight, Sophia. I've made mistakes, grave mistakes, but those mistakes have taught me valuable lessons about what not to do in ethically complex situations. Sophia sat silently for a moment, considering his words. Finally, she spoke. Let's say I agree. How would this work? How can I be sure you won't revert to your old ways? Ramirez leaned forward, his voice earnest. Because you would be in charge. You would have the authority to make the final decisions. I would be there to offer a different perspective, to make sure we consider all angles. But ultimately, the decision would be yours. Sophia stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the hospital courtyard, where patients and visitors enjoyed the afternoon sun. I need time to think about this, she said at last. Ramirez nodded, rising to his feet. Of course. The board meeting is tomorrow at 10. They're expecting an answer by then. As Ramirez headed for the door, Sophia called out, Dr. Ramirez, one more thing. Why are you telling me all of this? Why not let the board propose it to me directly? Sophia asked. Ramirez smiled sadly. Because I wanted you to know the whole truth before making a decision. And, well, I guess it's my way of trying to make things right this time. With that, he left the room, leaving Sophia deep in thought. That night, Sophia found herself in the hospital cafeteria, stirring a long cold cup of coffee. Her mind was spinning with the implications of Ramirez's offer. That coffee must be fascinating, a familiar voice broke through her thoughts. Sophia looked up to see Javier settling down across from her, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. Didn't hear you come in, she said, managing a weak smile. You seemed miles away. What's on that brilliant mind of yours? Sophia sighed, pushing her cold coffee aside. Ramirez made me an offer today. The board wants me to head a new medical ethics committee. Javier's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Wow, that's unexpected. What did you tell him? That I needed time to think about it, Sophia replied. But there's more. They want Ramirez to be a part of the committee as well. Javier frowned. Ramirez? The same Ramirez who almost covered up the Valdez case? Sophia nodded. The same. He says he's learned from his mistakes and that his experience could be valuable. And you believe him? Javier asked skeptically. Sophia ran a hand through her hair, frustrated. I don't know, Javier. A part of me wants to believe him. He seemed genuinely remorseful. But another part remembers how he acted during the Valdez case, she finished, leaving the unspoken question hanging in the air. Exactly, Javier agreed, and I can't help wondering if this is just a political maneuver to save their reputation. Javier took a sip of his coffee before replying. Look, Sophia, I know you. I know a big part of you wants to accept this challenge, to change things from within. Sophia smiled faintly. Am I that transparent? To me, yes, Javier replied, smiling back. But I also know you're worried about compromising your principles. Exactly, Sophia sighed. What if I accept and end up being manipulated? What if I can't make the difference I hope to make? Javier reached across the table and took her hand. Listen, no one can predict the future. But if anyone can navigate these murky waters and come out on top, it's you. You have a moral compass stronger than anyone I know. Sophia squeezed his hand gratefully. Thanks, Javier. That means a lot. Besides, he continued, think of the impact you could have. An ethics committee with real teeth could prevent situations like Don Alberto's in the future. Sophia nodded slowly, considering his words. You're right. It's a unique opportunity to change things from the inside. Exactly, Javier grinned. And knowing your tenacity, I wouldn't be surprised if you were revolutionizing the hospital's entire medical ethics system in a year. Sophia laughed. Now you're exaggerating. Maybe, Javier conceded, but not by much. Seriously, Sophia, I think you should seriously consider it. At that moment, Sophia's phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. Dr. Mendoza, it's Elena Valdez. I need to speak with you urgently. Please, it's important. Sophia frowned, showing Javier the message. Elena Valdez? Javier asked, surprised. What could she possibly want? Sophia bit her lip thoughtfully. I don't know, but it must be important if she's risking contacting me. You could ignore it, Javier suggested. After everything that happened? Sophia shook her head. No, I think I should hear what she has to say. It could be relevant to the case. Want me to come with you? Javier offered. No, it's okay, Sophia replied, getting to her feet. I think it's best I speak with her alone. Javier nodded, though his expression betrayed his worry. Be careful, all right? I always am, Sophia reassured him, squeezing his shoulder before leaving. Half an hour later, Sophia found herself in a small cafe a few blocks from the hospital. The place was nearly empty, with only a couple of scattered customers. In a corner booth, she spotted Elena Valdez, looking pale and haggard. Senora Valdez, Sophia greeted, taking a seat across from her. Elena looked up, her eyes red and puffy. Dr. Mendoza, thank you for coming. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after everything. What did you want to talk about? Sophia asked, keeping her expression neutral. Elena glanced around nervously before leaning forward. It's about my father. I think he's in danger. Sophia's blood ran cold. What do you mean? I've been getting calls, Elena explained, her voice barely a whisper. Threats. They say that if my father testifies at the trial, they'll kill him. Have you reported this to the police? Sophia asked, alarmed. Elena shook her head, tears welling up. I'm afraid I don't know who to trust. The police, the lawyers, everyone seems to be involved somehow. Sophia leaned back in her chair, processing the information. Senora Valdez, I understand you're afraid, but why come to me with this after everything that happened? Because you are the only one who truly cared about my father, Elena replied, her voice breaking. I know it sounds ironic, coming from me, but you were the only one who fought for him when everyone else was willing to ignore the truth. Sophia was silent for a moment, studying the woman before her. Elena Valdez seemed a shadow of the elegant, confident woman she'd met weeks earlier. Remorse and fear had taken their toll. These threats, Sophia said finally. Do you have any idea who might be behind them? Elena nodded slowly. I think it might be my brother, Carlos. Sophia raised her eyebrows in surprise. Your own brother? We were in this together, Elena admitted, shame evident in her face. But Carlos, he was always the brains behind everything. I just followed him. And now I think he's willing to do anything to avoid going to prison. Even kill his own father? Sophia asked, incredulous. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Carlos was always ruthless when it came to money, and now that he's cornered, she trailed off, then looked at Sophia, her eyes pleading. Dr. Mendoza, please, you have to help me protect my father. Sophia ran a hand over her face, feeling the weight of the situation. Senora Valdez, I understand your concern, but why should I trust you? A few weeks ago, you were willing to let your father die for money. Elena looked down ashamed. I know, and I will live with that guilt for the rest of my life. But I've had a lot of time to think, in jail. I realized how monstrous my actions were. I want to make things right, even if it's too late. Sophia observed her in silence, trying to discern if her words were sincere or just another manipulation. Dr. Mendoza, Elena continued, her voice barely a whisper. I know I don't deserve your help, but my father does. Please help me keep him safe. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, weighing her options. When she opened them, her gaze was determined. All right, Senora Valdez, I will help you, but on one condition. Anything, Elena replied quickly. I need you to tell me everything, Sophia said firmly. Every detail of the original plan, who else was involved, everything. If we're going to protect your father, I need to know what we're up against. Elena nodded, swallowing hard. I will. I'll tell you everything. Over the next hour, Elena Valdez unraveled a web of conspiracies and corruption that left Sophia stunned. It involved local politicians, hospital executives, and even some members of the police. The plan to get rid of Don Alberto had been just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger scheme of fraud and embezzlement. When Elena finished her account, Sophia sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process all the information. Dr. Mendoza, Elena said, finally breaking the silence. What are we going to do? Sophia looked her straight in the eye. First, we're going to make sure your father is protected. Then we're going to expose this entire network of corruption. But how? Elena asked, her voice laced with despair. Carlos has connections everywhere. Who can we turn to? Sophia leaned forward, her voice low but firm. I have an idea, but it's going to require courage on your part, Senora Valdez. Are you willing to testify about everything you've told me? Elena paled. That would mean... It would mean facing the consequences of your actions, Sophia finished. But it would also mean the chance to redeem yourself, to do the right thing for your father and for all the other victims of this scheme. Elena closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them, there was a spark of determination in them that Sophia hadn't seen before. I'll do it. I'll testify. Sophia felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Good. Now listen carefully. This is what we're going to do. As Sophia outlined her plan, she couldn't help thinking of the irony of the situation. A few weeks ago, Elena Valdez had been her enemy. Now they found themselves allies in a battle against a corruption far deeper than either of them had imagined. Leaving the cafe an hour later, Sophia felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She not only had to protect Don Alberto and expose the truth, but now she also carried the burden of Elena's safety. As she walked back to the hospital, her mind raced with the implications of everything she'd learned. The offer to lead the medical ethics committee now seemed almost insignificant compared to the task ahead. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a text from Javier. All good. How did the meeting with Elena go? Sophia stopped, staring at the message. How could she even begin to explain what she had just uncovered? Finally, she typed back a response. Things are more complicated than we thought. I need to see you urgently. Meet me in my office in 20 minutes. As Sophia walked back towards the hospital, she couldn't help but feel she was about to dive into waters far deeper and more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. But one thing was clear. There was no turning back. The truth had to come out, whatever the cost. Entering the hospital, Sophia noticed several staff members glancing at her with a mix of respect and curiosity. Rumors of her potential appointment to the ethics committee must have started circulating. Little did they know she was about to unleash a storm that would shake the very foundation of the hospital. While waiting for the elevator, Sophia saw Dr. Ramirez striding towards her. Dr. Mendoza, he called, have you given any thought to our conversation this morning? Sophia looked at him, aware she now possessed information that could implicate him in the conspiracy Elena had revealed. Dr. Ramirez, I've been giving it a lot of thought. In fact, I'd like to discuss it further with you. Could you meet me in my office in an hour? Ramirez looked surprised but nodded. Of course, I'll be there. As the elevator arrived and Sophia stepped inside, she couldn't help but notice the irony. A few hours ago, she had been considering working alongside Ramirez on the ethics committee. Now she wondered if he was also entangled in the web Elena had exposed. Reaching her office, she found Javier waiting for her. Sophia, he said, standing up as she entered. What's going on? You seem agitated. Sophia locked the door and turned to her friend and colleague. What I'm about to tell you is going to change everything. I need you to listen without interrupting, and then I need your help. Javier's expression was serious. I'm listening. Over the next 20 minutes, Sophia relayed everything Elena had revealed. The conspiracy, the threats, the sprawling corruption that extended far beyond Don Alberto's case. When she finished, Javier was silent for several seconds, processing the information. My God, Sophia, he finally said, this is huge. Are you sure Elena is telling the truth? Sophia nodded. I think so. Her fear seemed genuine, and the details she provided fit with things we've noticed, but could never fully explain. Javier ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. What are we going to do? If what you're saying is true, we can't trust anyone in the hospital. Not everyone, Sophia corrected, but we need to be cautious, and we need to act quickly. Don Alberto's life could be in danger. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Sophia and Javier exchanged a worried glance. Were you expecting anyone else? Javier whispered. Sophia shook her head, moving silently toward the door. Who is it? She asked. It's me, Marta. A familiar voice replied from the other side. Dr. Mendoza, I need to speak with you urgently. It's about Don Alberto. Sophia opened the door, allowing a visibly shaken Marta to enter, then locked the door again. "What is it, Marta?" Sophia asked. Marta glanced nervously between Sophia and Javier before speaking. "I just overheard something disturbing. Two orderlies were talking in the hallway. They mentioned that someone had offered a large sum of money to take care of Don Alberto tonight." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you sure of what you heard?" Marta nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. Doctor, I think they're going to try to, well, you know." Javier jumped to his feet. "We have to do something now." Sophia nodded, her mind racing. "Marta, do you trust me?" "With my life, doctor," Marta replied without hesitation. Night had fallen over the hospital, fluorescent lights humming softly in the nearly deserted hallways. Sophia, Javier, and Marta huddled in a small supply room, speaking in urgent whispers. "Let's go over the plan one more time," Sophia said, her voice tense but determined. "Marta, you'll stay at your post, watching over Don Alberto's room. Javier, you'll be in the monitoring room, keeping an eye on the security cameras. I'll move between Don Alberto's room and the nearby corridors." Javier frowned. "Sophia, I don't like the idea of you being out there alone. What if you run into those who plan to harm Don Alberto?" Sophia shook her head. "I can't ask you to risk yourselves any more than you already are. Besides, I know this hospital better than anyone. If something happens, I can slip away quickly." Marta, who had been nervously biting her lip, spoke up. "Doctor, shouldn't we inform security? Or the police?" "We can't trust anyone else yet," Sophia replied. "The corruption runs too deep. Until we know who's involved, we have to handle this ourselves." The three fell silent for a moment, the weight of the situation palpable in the air. "All right," Javier said finally, pulling out his phone. "I've created a chat group for the three of us. Let's use this to stay in contact. Anything suspicious, no matter how small, we report it immediately." Sophia and Marta nodded, checking their phones. "One more thing," Sophia added, looking at her colleagues seriously. "If at any point you feel you're in danger, I want you to withdraw immediately. Your safety is paramount." "Same goes for you," Javier replied, placing a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Don't play the hero, all right?" Sophia offered a tight smile. "I'll do what I have to. Now come on, it's almost midnight." The three left the supply room, each heading to their assigned position. Sophia walked towards Don Alberto's room, her heart pounding in her chest. Reaching the door, she paused, watching the old man sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the danger lurking nearby. "Don't worry, Don Alberto," Sophia murmured. "I won't let anything happen to you." Hours crawled by. Sophia alternated between staying in Don Alberto's room and patrolling the nearby corridors. Every shadow, every unexpected sound put her on high alert. The silence of the night was broken only by the occasional beep of machines and the hushed whispers of the night nurses. Close to 2 a.m., Sophia's phone vibrated. It was a message from Javier. "Suspicious activity in the south corridor. 2 men I don't recognize heading your way." Sophia's pulse quickened. She quickly slipped into Don Alberto's room and quietly closed the door behind her. She hid behind a curtain, holding her breath as she heard footsteps approaching. The voices of 2 men became audible as they neared the room. "Are you sure this is it?" one whispered. "Yes, you idiot," the other hissed back, his voice irritated. "Room 305, the old man, Valdez." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. It was them. The assassins had arrived. "What about the nurses?" the first man asked. "Don't worry about them," the second man replied. "We've been assured no one will bother us. Now shut up and get the syringe ready." Sophia stifled a gasp. She had to act, and quickly. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and sent a message to the group. "They're here. 2 men, going to use a syringe. Need help now." She had barely sent the message when the door to the room slowly creaked open. Sophia held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she feared the intruders might hear it. The 2 men crept in. From her hiding place, Sophia could see one of them carrying a syringe. "Let's make this quick," one of them muttered, approaching Don Alberto's bed. Sophia knew she had to act. She couldn't allow them to hurt her patient. Without thinking twice, she emerged from her hiding place. "Stop right there," she shouted, startling the intruders. The men whirled around, surprise quickly turning to anger. "Who the hell are you?" one of them growled, advancing menacingly toward Sophia. Sophia backed away but kept her voice firm. I'm Dr. Mendoza, and you have no authorization to be here. Leave right now or I'll call security. The man with the syringe smiled maliciously. I'm afraid that's not going to happen, doctor. You see, we have a job to do, and you're in the way. Sophia glanced at the door, calculating her chances of escape. But before she could move, the other man grabbed her arm. Not so fast, sweetheart, he said, tightening his grip. Looks like we'll have to take care of you first. At that moment, the door burst open. Javier rushed in, closely followed by 2 security guards. Let her go! Javier yelled. What followed was a chaotic flurry of movement and shouts. The guards lunged at the intruders, while Javier raced toward Sophia. In the confusion, the syringe clattered to the floor, shattering and spilling its contents. Are you okay? Javier asked, checking Sophia for injuries, concern etched on his face. Sophia, still trembling, nodded. Yes, I'm okay. Don Alberto. They both turned toward the bed, where Don Alberto, surprisingly, remained asleep, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded around him. The guards had managed to subdue the intruders, who now lay face down on the floor, handcuffed. I'll call the police, one of the guards said, pulling out his radio. Wait, Sophia interrupted. We don't know who we can trust. We need to speak with someone reliable in the police force. Javier nodded. I have a contact in the major crimes unit. I'll call him personally. As Javier made the call, Sophia approached the intruders. Who sent you? She asked, her voice firm despite the fear that still lingered. The men remained silent, avoiding her gaze. They're not going to talk, one of the guards said. Guys like these never do. Sophia was about to reply when she noticed something on the neck of one of the men, a small tattoo barely visible beneath his shirt collar. That tattoo, she said, leaning closer for a better look. It's the same. Her voice trailed off as realization hit her. She had seen that same tattoo before, in a photo in Dr. Ramirez's office. It was the symbol of an exclusive fraternity that Ramirez belonged to. Javier, Sophia called, her voice tense. I think I know who's behind this. Before she could elaborate, Marta burst into the room out of breath. Dr. Mendoza, she exclaimed. I just saw Dr. Ramirez leaving the hospital in a hurry. He looked scared. Sophia and Javier exchanged knowing glances. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. We need to go after him, Sophia said. He might be trying to escape. Javier nodded. I'll go. You stay here with Don Alberto. We don't know if there are more people involved. Be careful. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The police arrived, this time trustworthy officers, thanks to Javier's contact. The intruders were questioned, though they remained stubbornly silent. Don Alberto was moved to a secure ICU ward with reinforced security. Sophia couldn't stop thinking about Ramirez. How could she have been so blind? The signs had been there all along, but she had refused to see them. Close to dawn, Javier returned, looking exhausted but triumphant. We got him, he announced. Ramirez was trying to catch a flight to South America. They arrested him at the airport. Sophia sank into a chair, relief and exhaustion finally catching up to her. I can't believe we actually did it, that we exposed this whole conspiracy. Javier sat down next to her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. We did it because of you, Sophia. Your courage and determination brought us here. Sophia shook her head. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. You, Marta, even Elena Valdez in the end. Every piece was crucial. At that moment, a police officer approached them. Dr. Mendoza, Dr. Soto, Mr. Valdez is awake and asking for you. Sophia and Javier looked at each other in surprise. With all the chaos of the night, they had almost forgotten that Don Alberto was more than just a patient to protect. He was a man who had been through hell and deserved to know the truth. They entered Don Alberto's room to find him sitting up in bed, looking tired but alert. Ah, my savior, he said with a weak smile. Come, sit down. I believe we have a lot to talk about. Sophia and Javier took seats beside the bed. For a moment no one spoke, the weight of recent events hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Don Alberto broke the silence. So, is anyone going to explain why my room looks like a crime scene? Sophia couldn't help but let out a nervous laugh. It's a long story, Don Alberto. A very long story. Well, the old man said, settling back into his pillows. It seems I have all the time in the world now. Start from the beginning, doctor. And so Sophia began recounting the events of the past few weeks. She told him about the initial suspicions, Elena's confession, the conspiracy they had uncovered, and finally the events of that night. Don Alberto listened in silence, his expression shifting from surprise to sorrow, and finally to a kind of resigned understanding. I always knew Carlos's ambition knew no bounds, he said when Sophia finished her tale, but I never imagined he would go this far. I'm so sorry, Don Alberto, Sophia said softly. I know this must be painful, discovering the true extent of your children's betrayal. Don Alberto sighed deeply. It is, doctor, but I'm also grateful. Grateful to be alive, and grateful to have people like you fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Javier, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, spoke up. Don Alberto, what are you going to do now? With Carlos arrested and Elena cooperating with the police? Now, Don Alberto interrupted, a weary smile spreading across his face. I'm going to live, Dr. Soto. I'm going to live every day I have left as if it were my last. And I'm going to make sure that whatever good can be done with my fortune will be done. Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. That's an admirable attitude, Don Alberto. Not as admirable as your actions, Dr. Mendoza, the old man replied, taking her hand. You risked everything to do the right thing. That's something I will never forget. At that moment, a police officer entered the room. Excuse the interruption, but we need to take Mr. Valdez's official statement. Don Alberto nodded. Of course, officer. I'm ready to tell my story. As Sophia and Javier prepared to leave the room, Don Alberto called out to them one last time. Dr. Mendoza, Dr. Soto, he said, his voice tired but firm. Before you go, I want you to know something. What you have done goes beyond medical duty. You have shown integrity and courage that are rare these days. I want you to know that you have my full support in whatever you decide to do from now on. Sophia and Javier exchanged a surprised look before turning back to Don Alberto. Thank you, Don Alberto, Sophia replied, touched. That means a lot to us. With a final nod of gratitude, they left the room, leaving Don Alberto with the police officer. In the hallway, Sophia leaned against the wall, the exhaustion of the past hours finally catching up to her. Are you all right? Javier asked, concerned. Sophia nodded slowly. Yes, just processing everything. It's been a long night. And an even longer day ahead, Javier added. The press will be all over this soon. It's going to be a media circus. As if on cue, Sophia's phone began ringing. It was an unknown number. Dr. Mendoza speaking, she answered cautiously. Doctor, this is Patricia Lanza from City News, a brisk voice said on the other end. We've received information about a foiled murder attempt at your hospital. Can you confirm or deny these rumors? Sophia closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I'm sorry, but I cannot comment at this time. Any official information will be communicated through the appropriate hospital channels. She hung up before the reporter could ask any more questions. It started, she said, looking at Javier. He nodded, his expression grim. We're going to need a plan to handle this. We can't let the story spin out of control. At that moment, they saw Dr. Ramirez being escorted by two police officers. The once proud chief of staff now looked haggard and defeated. As he passed Sophia and Javier, he shot them a look of pure hatred. This isn't over. You hear me, Ramirez? He hissed. You have no idea who you're messing with. One of the officers shoved him forward. Come on, Doc, save your threats for the judge. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. Despite their apparent victory, Ramirez's words reminded her that this was far from over. We need to speak with the board, Sophia said, turning to Javier. They need to know everything that's happened. Javier nodded. I agree, but first I think we both need a coffee and maybe something to eat. It's been a long night. Sophia couldn't help but smile. You're right. Let's go to the cafeteria. As they walked towards the cafeteria, Sophia couldn't help but notice the looks they were getting from the hospital staff. Some looked confused, others scared, and a few, was that admiration in their eyes? In the cafeteria, as they were waiting in line to order their coffees, Marta hurried up to them. Doctor, she said in a low voice, you have to see this. She showed them her tablet where a breaking news article glowed on the screen. Scandal at Central Hospital. Attempted murder, corruption, and medical heroism. Sophia felt her stomach churn as she read the headline. How? Who leaked this? Marta shook her head. I don't know, but it's everywhere. Social media is exploding. Javier took the tablet, quickly scanning the article. It's naming names. Yours, Sophia, Don Alberto's, even mine. This is a disaster. We need to control the narrative before things completely spiral out of control, Sophia murmured, running a hand through her hair. At that moment, Sophia's phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. The hospital director's. Dr. Mendoza. The director's voice was tense as soon as Sophia answered. My office now, and bring Dr. Soto with you. Before Sophia could respond, he hung up. It was the director, she said, looking at Javier. He wants to see us in his office now. Javier sighed, setting the tablet down. Guess coffee will have to wait. As they made their way to the director's office, Sophia couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and determination. She knew what was coming wouldn't be easy, but she also knew they had done the right thing and was ready to defend her actions, no matter the consequences. Reaching the director's office, they found the door open. Inside, the director, normally a composed man, looked agitated, pacing back and forth. Dr. Mendoza, Dr. Soto, come in. He shut the door behind them as they entered. Sophia and Javier took seats in front of the imposing mahogany desk as the director sat down heavily in his chair. I assume you've seen the news? The director began, his voice strained. Yes, sir, Sophia replied. We just found out. The director stared at them for a moment before speaking. I want you to tell me exactly what happened from the beginning, and don't you dare leave anything out. For the next hour, Sophia and Javier recounted the events of the past few weeks. The director listened in silence, his expression shifting from disbelief to shock, and finally to a sort of resigned acceptance. When they finished, the director leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. My God, he murmured, it's even worse than I thought. Sir, Sophia began, I know our actions may seem... The director held up a hand, cutting her off. Dr. Mendoza, before you continue, let me tell you something. What you have done is both admirable and incredibly dangerous. Javier leaned forward. Sir, we understand the implications, but we couldn't... No, you don't understand, the director interrupted, his voice firm. You've uncovered a conspiracy that involves some of the most powerful people in this city, people who will not hesitate to destroy you. If they have the opportunity... Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. What do you suggest we do, sir? She asked. The director looked at them both for a long moment before replying. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Understood? They both nodded. Good, the director continued. Years ago, when I was a young doctor like you, I found myself in a similar situation. I uncovered irregularities, high-level corruption, and like you, I decided to do the right thing. The director paused, his eyes lost in distant memories. It almost cost me everything. My career, my family, even my life was in danger. He sighed. In the end, I managed to expose the truth, but the cost was enormous. Sophia and Javier exchanged surprised glances. They had never imagined the stoic director had such a story. I'm telling you this, the director continued, because I want you to fully understand what you're getting yourselves into. This isn't a battle you can win alone. What do you suggest we do? Javier asked. The director leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I have contacts, people in positions of power who still believe in doing the right thing. I can put you in touch with them. But I need to know, are you willing to go all the way with this? Because once you start, there's no turning back. Sophia looked at Javier, seeing in his eyes the same determination she felt. She turned back to the director and nodded firmly. We're willing, sir, she said. What we've seen, what we've uncovered, we can't just ignore it. We have to do something. The director nodded, a small smile of pride touching his lips. Good. Then this is what we're going to do. For the next hour, the director outlined a daring plan. It would involve investigative journalists, incorruptible prosecutors, and even federal agents. It will be dangerous, he warned them. There will be threats, attempts at bribery, and possibly worse. But if you succeed, you could expose a network of corruption that reaches far beyond this hospital. When they finally left the director's office, Sophia and Javier paused in the hallway, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were about to undertake. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Javier asked, his voice soft but full of concern. "We could just hand over what we know to the authorities and let them handle it." Sophia shook her head, her eyes filled with steely determination. "No, Javier. We've come too far to back down now. Don Alberto, the other patients who might have become victims, even Elena, we owe this to them. We have to make sure justice is served." Javier studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You're right. I'm with you on this, Sophia, till the end." As they walked down the hallway, Sophia couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and exhilaration. She knew the days and weeks ahead would be the most challenging of her life, but she also knew they were doing the right thing. "You know what, Javier?" she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think I'm finally going to accept that offer to head the ethics committee." Javier chuckled. "Why am I not surprised? You always have to go one step further, don't you?" Sophia shrugged, her smile widening. "Someone has to do it, and after everything we've seen, who better than us to make sure something like this never happens again?" As they walked away, Sophia couldn't help but feel they were on the cusp of something big, something that would change not only their lives but potentially the entire healthcare system in the city. And though the road ahead would be difficult, she was ready to face it. With Javier by her side and the truth on their side, she felt they could face anything. The hospital buzzed with activity around them, but for Sophia and Javier, it was as if they were in the eye of the storm, the calm before the tempest they were about to unleash. A tempest of truth, justice, and change. And so, with determined steps, they walked towards their uncertain but purposeful future. The real battle had just begun, but they were ready to face it together.